Thanks very much. I don't know where to start really, because that's just a lot of well, and psychologically as well. There's many worlds there. It's very rich, and there's loads of things to say. But maybe I could just start by asking you both. It's just struck me about the idea of internal voices and more external social voices in relation to production, if you see what I mean. How you for you, Beatrice.
I killed all my collaborators.
You killed them. I mean,
thriller, so.
The film is actually ended up being a sort of resume of the problems of having to make a work on your own and with other people. So I just wanted to, if you could say maybe what the good parts or good points are of that, the difficulties, and how the sort of internal social voices conflict, or
I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to talk about work when you're in the middle of it. So, excuse me if it's not clear, or. And also, I don't know. Being part of this process, that it's also difficult to know how to talk about it sort of more theoretically and then more emotionally, because they sort of collapse. I mean, we were just saying over coffee, it's a bit like a torturous group therapy experiment. But I don't know how to give you a sort of more refined version of that in terms of ask me again, like the specific.
Well, the narrator ends up is you.
Yeah.
And you're sort of describing this problem, or this idea that was started off, and then it sort of unravelled and it came apart. And when you're making a work, you have to make decisions, as I was sort of referring to at the beginning. You've got to make a lot of decisions that are quite practical sometimes, or formal, or about organisation. And I know a lot of your work is also about organisation and applying for funding and everything that goes in. But it's quite an autonomous process that you have to decide upon and make very individually, as well as creatively. And it's a different voice in a way. It's a different place to be in construction, as opposed to, say, when you're in collaboration and you're talking. And I'm just thinking about how those things work for you.
I think one of the main problems with the structure was like trying to find this balance between collective production and autonomy. So trying to look back to Cardew for a sort of, well, not in a nostalgic sense, trying to make Cardew have a conversation with the contemporary landscape, but trying to explore a model for how you might, for the relationship between the individual to the collective. And so somehow what happened in terms of the production of this film was, I think, my transposition of musical modes of production into the filmmaking process was maybe a bit too literal, in the sense that filmmaking is not live in the same sense that music making is. So in an improvisation where you have a collective situation where everybody has their own instrument, you're on stage and you come together in a moment of trying to make that thing work within the same temporal framework. And in film that's very different, and it takes place over a different time frame. And so for me, I think one of the big problems was it felt like we never had like our moment on stage, if you know what I mean. And in a way, the individual, everybody's individual part became their own concern, which makes a lot of sense. Why would it be anything else? But in a sense, I feel like the common goal, say, of a live performance, or the common goal of the film itself, the film never became a common goal. And I think that was the tension, and I think that was the failure, but also what makes it very interesting as well.
So the common goal, it was like a failed utopia, like you said, like a utopian, we can all work together and produce the perfect collaboration.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the most collective thing I've ever worked on, and the least collaborative in some ways. If that's not too weird a thing to say, yeah. But I think that's interesting. I'm not interested in Cardew in terms of like totally, I'm not interested in totally egalitarian production structures. All the things I make have this ugly problem of authorship rears its head, and they end up actually always being very authored, so it's just that they play out differently in different situations, yeah.
And maybe Raimundus, I mean, just after your talk there, the first thing you said was, oh, did I mention everybody that's participating today when I curated the exhibition? You know, when he told you about the exhibition, he said Sally left the door open, and I was in the corner, and Francesco, and it was his first concern when he came off the stage. There's a sort of immediate sense of a social responsibility for this event, let alone the event that he's trying to describe within the hologram. And I suppose it was in relation to this. I'm sort of there's a question about the responsibility that you might have for the people that you're working with, or the collaboration, the collaborative group, and your own individual voice again. You know, and I mean, you have a persona as well, because in your own work, in your own how you can stand, and you know, can speak your projects very well. And I suppose I wanted to ask a question about is it important, an individual life and a collective life, and how responsible are you for the collaborative partnerships you make?
It's an interesting question, Jesse. Thank you. I liked your film, Beatrice.
Thanks.
It's very nice. Thanks for showing.
Thank you.
And you mentioned before also the voice and narrator. I think those are also very interesting categories. To me, like, let's see, I'm just a narrator in that sense, like, you know, in this whole situation. I just try to narrate what is happening, both now and then, and at some point in future. When I was thinking about the hologram project, somehow I thought it could be interesting to apply that logic of any part of the whole contains the information of the whole, rather than just being a detail. I thought it would be interesting to apply it to authorship. How it would work if that logic would apply to all the people that are involved in the hologram, whether in terms of producing it, or whether in terms of like being cast for it, or whether in terms of narrating it, like, you know, I in that sense narrated. But we didn't solve it that way. I mean, I liked the idea, but I didn't know how to proceed in a way. I mean, it would have been very mechanical to sort of like, let's say, equally assume authorship, like 20 people assuming authorship of one hologram. However, maybe it's still an interesting thing to do. But because each person involved has their own individual practice, whatever that practice is, I always find it interesting to talk about and, you know, go into like derives about those individual practices. In a way, like, what could be interesting is to talking about this whole collective hologram is actually just dive into presenting one person's work, let's see. Talking about voice, again, I think to me the analogy that I later found in the figure of Olsen twins was actually coming from someone telling me a story how supposedly sometimes in opera you have two singers behind the curtain on the left and on the right. One starts singing and the other picks up the song in exactly the same voice. So what you have an audio illusion of one voice, but the voice is actually moving in the space. And I still don't know whether it's true or not. It doesn't matter. I mean, I like the story, and the story was quite productive for me to think also, like, you know, how the illusion of, let's say, individual voice is created. Because individual voice is never, individual. It's always created by many people.
Yeah, of course.
In a sense, like, you know, now, like, I'm also speaking what you are thinking.
But yeah.
I liked you mentioned the triangle, like in the role of the curator as being outside the triangle, and I think one of the issues with the film in the circle in Karju's score was like somehow this tension between being inside the circle and outside.
Exactly.
And the tension between the film being just a group show, which I felt uncomfortable with, or being something that I authored, and then so how to deal with that position, basically.
Yeah, you don't want to be the master of that, you know, that file.
No, but at the same time, I want to have authorship somewhere, because, like you say, like if you went into the hologram and everyone, it was just kind of like collectively totally egalitarian. I'm not sure how interesting the result would be. I don't know. Maybe I'm not brave enough to actually just let that unfold. But I think in my own practice, it's always been that somehow you end up having to take responsibility or take the reins, and that's how you, in the end, make. Yeah, I don't know.
Is it? Have you tried to reflect, like, what authorship means to you? Like, why let's say you're interested more in authorship structure rather than like this diffusion?
I think, I don't know, other than my own narcissism, I'm not sure how to answer that.
Maybe
Yeah.
there's the idea of control sort of springs to mind in many ways, psychologically, but also in relation to making as well. And both of you seem to set up strategies where you almost on purpose lose control. And I think there's, both of you have talked about placing the failure of failure as a particular structure in making. And I mean, I wonder if the endeavour for this sort of utopian collectivity is actually also a way of losing control and then bringing it back, reining it back, i.e. when you have to make a decision, I've got to make a hologram, how big is it? You know, how big is it? Because they only come in such and such a size, and you know, it takes a certain person does it. And with you, I've got to make a film and it's got to show in November. But I wonder if there's something that's important about making, which is about losing control.
I think losing control. I mean, I wouldn't talk about failure. Failure is, I think, it's a different story. But losing control, or let's say, maintaining open parameters of what you're doing, is perhaps, I'm interested how it works, but not in failure per se.
Yeah, I definitely I'm interested in like open-ended compositional structures, and often this issue of authorship comes in relation to where the authorship resides within that, and that's in a way, but the act of like setting up a structure that produces a series of results is really interesting and enjoyable to me. On a good day, in a good mood, I really like the randomness or the lack of control, or, what that potentially produces. And it's very anti-directorial, actually, in conventional cinematic terms.
Yeah, but that's just a mad contradiction as well, because you have to be a director when it comes to making a film. So there's a sort of friction always. Just a quick question before we open up, if you've got any questions yourselves. I just wanted to ask, how important is seduction? And when I say seduction, I'm really thinking more in relation to the spectator. So both of you seem to employ very verging on, I mean, they're rich experiences, you know. Maybe I just leave it like that. Raimundas?
I think at the moment, reduction is more important.
Fair enough. Beatrice?
John Tilbury always said, I don't know if any of you are familiar with his work. He's an amazing pianist. He's about almost late 70s now, and he wrote Kaju's biography, which took him 25 years actually, which is amazing, an endeavour. But he always says, actually he repeatedly says in the book, it's sort of become part of his script, that it has to be worthwhile people getting out of bed to come and see something. And I think that's really, it always really strikes me when he says that. But he encapsulates this very particular relationship that he has to audience, that's about generosity, that's about taking something potentially really avant-garde and or whatever, obscure or whatever, whatever adjective you want to use, and wrapping that with a language that anyone can understand, or that allows somebody to keep sitting in a room. And I think that's one of the reasons that I like filmmaking as a medium, because it has those qualities of seduction. And so they're basically, seduction's important to me in terms of audience and giving someone a reason to keep standing in a room and watching something. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone got any questions before we Brian? Hi.
Hi. This is a question to Jesse. really, because the way I'm experiencing this as a live event is kind of replicating what's been focused on in terms of the I and the community, this negotiation between author. And you're in the middle of this, and you've conceived it and assembled it. So I'm interested in the way that you've assembled the structure of the day in relation to the I and the we, because that's further complicated. Obviously, you know, because you're in both of the projects talked about. So I just wondered what your role is, or what you see yourself as in this event, because it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is. I haven't really quite worked it out yet, but
Good question.
yeah.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, I'm special effects in Beatrice's film. I'm really just sort of, I have been involved in Beatrice's project, not so much really with Raymond. I've just talked to him about his project. So I don't know. When you, I've got loads of things personally in my work that deal with these issues, so I'm naturally drawn to them. And I suppose it's the closest I've been to curating, or how I think of curating. Curating is more, I would think of it as where it comes from, which is the word to care for. And it's about caring for practice. And I suppose my role here is caring for the individual processes and practices that I think relate to each other, and I feel somehow attached to, and I don't really know. So it's not. I mean, it's weird. I'm trying to, although like the same thing. I'm here. I'm in the middle, but at the same time, I'm trying to duck out because I don't really want to hear my voice too much. I want to hear these voices. So it's caring for ideas. I think. Maybe I have to think about it a little bit more over lunch and.
No, it's good.
Come back.
Well, can I interject and make a suggestion as well? Isn't it also about how one of the things that you deal with, or I think, or see you dealing with, is how speech represents the objects that you make through, like, your fictional press releases, or how does discourse interact with production?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to talk about. no. I really appreciate that, and I could, but I'm trying to dodge talking about me too much. But there are things in my practice that are really obviously very resonant here. But maybe I'd like. This is probably a good example. I'm dodging. But, are there any other questions? Mike Cooter. He's next to the.
Yeah, it's more just.
Not another question for me.
No, it's not. You're fine dodging this one. I was interested in the concerns that Beatrice has about attempting to both kind of document a communal experience, but then to sort of claim ownership on it. And I was thinking about it in relationship to Raymondus's work with hypnotism, and how, I guess from the point of view of an artist, how you assess the work that's been made in that circumstance, because there's a way in which it's constructed that is entirely sort of social and communal, in the way that the text is translated, the circumstances of that experience. But there's a point at which it becomes embedded in somebody's mind. And I'm curious whether even the people that have undergone the hypnosis have access to it. And then at what stage do you have access to how the work actually exists? And whether it's important that potentially you have no experience, and how do you assess the, I guess, the success or failure, or even the transmission of what may have been your conception of the artwork, and then how it exists in the world. And I think there's this relationship to how collaborative experience is then represented, or ownership is taken from it, or taken with it. That's there in Beatrice's work, but it seems more oblique with yours. And I'm wondering how you kind of how you assess the work that's produced when it's at this stage of remove.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, your comment, because let's say with the hypnotic show, in a way, I was calling it this summer as neuro-publishing, because my book was being republished each time Marcus Lachance would do an induction. And so, let's say the book is authored by myself, but the way it's neuro-published in someone's imagination is something completely different. It becomes something completely different. Like I would not, if I would just encounter those images or wherever experiences people have while following the stories, I would not recognize them as my book at all. So in that sense, it's a completely different domain. And to me, then it becomes very interesting because I become a visitor in, let's say, in my own book, because it's completely unfamiliar. And perhaps it could be seen that our authored structure is before it enters someone's imagination, and when it enters, it's already it's another world. It's already like a different domain, like a collective kind of intelligence domain where it becomes something else. But then, to me, it becomes much more interesting.
What, I'm curious what level of access the people that have undergone the hypnosis actually have to the, I mean, how embedded is the information? Is it done to the level such that they can relate back to you the story that they've been told? Or is it
hardly
in someone's unconscious that then will produce its own results?
Yeah, it's much more about producing your own projections or whatever experiences, senses. And there is a feedback mechanism in a way that Marcos maintains, so like he's in touch with the people that went through it, and he speaks with them about what they experienced via email, let's say asking them after a while, like, what do you remember now about it? And often those memories, they have nothing to do with the book. But I mean, they're very crisp and they're very high resolution memories.
Does that form part of the project? Is that the representation then of that?
It's becoming, I think it's becoming like an evolving part of the project. I don't know yet how it will feed back into the project itself, but I think we're thinking of how to feed back what actually people experience, what they project, what they imagine back into the project, perhaps like, into the experiences of other people that are going into it.
Okay, thanks. Sally, did you have a question? I saw in the front.
Thank you very much. Don't know who this is for yet. Let's see how it comes out. But imagination, okay, which is a word you're using a lot, Raymondus, and I did participate in the hypnotic show, so I've experienced how you use it as a medium and a tool and a technique. And then I'm aware that in that text that you wrote, Sarah, that you read, that you collated, you transcribed, Beatrice, there's a very, very tentative moment at the end where you almost apologetically bring out the word imagination. And I remember when I was at art school a million years ago, it was a real no-no to admit to using your imagination because we were very anti-emotive inflection.
Yeah.
But things are very different now because that was a million years ago. So can you tell me why you're still handling that word so tentatively when other people are kind of slapping it about really happily?
I don't know that I am handling it tentatively. The text is collective voices. Many people. It's a conversation. It's actually John who.
I thought it was you.
No, it's actually John who brings up the imagination. Maybe being 75 makes you tentative about the imagination. But actually, I don't think he was being tentative about it. I think he was throwing it in there as a really worthwhile word in relation to fiction, also. But there's obviously a big crossover. Imagination is a great category, and I think one of my interests in musical scores, and that I see reflected in you talking about your work, also is, and also that I'm interested in sort of modernist literature, is this attempt to activate a reader through imaginative devices, and musical scores do that as well, in the sense that they propose more. Again, in terms of authorship, I suppose, so they're proposing more more ambiguous sort of language, musical language. So in conventional notation, you have the note G, which is this sound, and in experimental notation, you have a picture of a circle, which is whatever sound you want it to be. And so they turn on the imagination a lot, and I'm getting lost, but I can see a lot of crossovers with maybe what we're trying to do in terms of activating things in a viewer's mind rather than producing them concretely. Yeah.
Yeah, and in a way, perhaps making a difference between imagination and fantasy. So, are you interested in fantasy?
I'm interested in your fantasy right now. Yes, go on, tell me.
It's like a sex chat shop.
I think, yeah, we spoke with someone about imagination and the difference with the fantasy, that the fantasy is...
Shall I come here?
Sure, please. Thanks, Sally. But the fact that fantasy is so much about, let's say, some kind of creation out of nothing, and that is not so connected with the actual situation you're in. So in that sense, like, I see imagination as some kind of domain of sensibility that creates your relationship with the world rather than like makes you see things or like invent things. I mean, imagination is not about inventiveness. It's not about innovation.
Extrapolation.
Activation.
Extrapolation.
Activation.
Oh, extrapolation. That's how I argue. I just say the word over and over again.
What about the desire? Desire? Imagination? I don't know. Is that important? Shall I just do
Can of worms, yeah.
Is it important for you, Justin?
Huh?
Can I talk about that later?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got a lot of desire. Sorry. So, Francesco, a question over there. Thank God.
Grazie. Non è una domanda, è più che altro una riflessione. A proposito dell'idea di perdita di controllo.
Thank you very much. This is not so much a question, it's a reflection of mine. The loss of control has been evoked quite a few times. I'm not sure how true loss of control for any artist is, and at the same time I feel strongly that every work of art has within its own productive process the sense of loss of control, which is given by the dimension of interpretation that every piece of art of whatever matrix undergoes once it is put in the hands of the actors or anybody who is performing this piece of art. So my reflection in summary is loss of control is within any creative process once it's handed over to the actors or the people who operate its fruition.
So sort of endemic in making work anyway. That's how I take that.
I think Francesco is saying that we shouldn't try to prescribe experiences and interpretations of the public, and we shouldn't program it. I mean, perhaps we should pre-program it, but not necessarily control it, because it's already about translation.
I read it as, it's implicit anyway. It was interesting him asking the question in Italian, and the whole form of that comment being sort of replicated in the way it's delivered. Because of course you have no idea what he's saying apart from controllo, and then so you have this kind of fantasy of what's the other.
A couple of times.
So he's already embodying his own point through the presentation, which is kind of great. Yeah.
Was there opera involved? What you were saying, Francesco?
Sì, opera nel senso di opera d'arte, non di opera, non nel senso di opera, no, di canto.
Okay.
The word opera in Italian means work of art, so it's not necessarily opera in...
Well, actually, doesn't it also mean collective labour? Am I wrong?
In questo caso è riferito chiaramente all'opera d'arte, cioè al pezzo d'arte, come dire, al lavoro realizzato dall'artista. L'opera in senso collettivo, no?
No.
Okay, never mind.
There is a question.
In this case, I was referring to the work of art, the piece which is made, produced by the artist. Opera means work, so but there's no special collective connotation with this word.
Great. Okay. I think maybe one last question before lunch. Yeah. Hi.
Simple question. I just wondered
Sorry,
if
is that mic on?
Yeah, it is.
It is. Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
on?
Sorry.
I haven't
Yeah.
got some water to pour in a glass to test it.
Sorry.
I just wondered if there was a political value attached to the word collective or collectivity for either of you two guys, or whether the term collective is a kind of good in and of itself, or whether there's a obviously, say for the Occupy movement, direct democracy and collectivity is incredibly important for their political message, and it's attached to politics. Yeah, that's the question.
I don't know. I mean, that's really complicated.
Well, it's, in a way, could be not complicated.
I like that you said simple question.
Yeah.
Simple for me.
I think it's complicated in relation to making art. I think if you mentioned relational aesthetics and all those kinds. I mean, that's one of Claire Bishop's big arguments, isn't it? Like, the value of a work shouldn't be the fact that a work is simply collective doesn't make it a good work. And I definitely would side with that. I'm very suspicious of collectivity being per se in itself good. But yeah, can of worms. I don't know.
I think to me, hypothetically, collectivity is an interesting stage where you can invent different forms of subjectivity. And let's say where an individual can be activated or emancipated differently than being on its own, and let's say new ways of being together could be created, and new ways of sensuality of being together.
Okay, that's a good moment to leave and have lunch. I think we start at 2:00 again with a presentation by Francesco. So I see you at 2. Thanks very much to both presentations this morning.
Thanks, Jessica.